How you doing, Nick?
Good. How are you? Everyone good?
Good.
Okay. So just do a couple of minutes meditation on the breath. So now let's generate a bodhicitta motivation for this evening's session. Thinking the purpose of my life is to lead all sentient beings from suffering to enlightenment. In order to do that, first I have to reach enlightenment myself. my reaching enlightenment depends on my completing the path to enlightenment, along which there are likely to be many difficulties and obstacles. So I need to be able to transform those difficulties and obstacles into the path. Therefore, I'm going to study this teaching on transforming problems into happiness in order to reach enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. So, like that, we set our motivation for what we're about to do. Okay, so any questions on anything we've done so far, or either here or anywhere? Okay.
It's Rebecca, Nick. Can you hear me?
Yep.
This isn't so much a question, but I wanted to report back that I tried applying the lessons from this class in real life and was quite surprised that it worked. At least I was woken up in the middle of the night by just other people in my house not being very considerate. And I was really frustrated and I was really angry. And I thought, I'm just going to try to take this as an opportunity to learn how to practice patience. And I even thought that thought so skeptically. Like I thought, but it didn't make me feel all the way better, but it actually made me feel a little bit better, and it kind of was calming, and it sort of made me feel like less taken over by being frustrated and angry. So I was just really pleased to have that, have this class to fall back on in that moment of frustration.
Yeah, okay, good. So, there was some definite benefit. I'd say maybe the best benefit is it protects you from creating more negative karma than you might otherwise have created, even getting up and opening your door and shouting at people to shut the hell up, or then making them angry and then having a fight. I mean, who knows how things can escalate, but and as useful as that is, we have to remember the greater purpose of the teaching is to help to not just to make us feel better in the moment, but to help us get closer to enlightenment, which obviously that did. But, and feeling better in the moment is sort of a beneficial side effect, I guess. So any other practitioners amongst us? Okay, so we're looking at, we've been looking at Lama Zopa Rinpoche's book, Transforming Problems into Happiness, and started, the first few weeks I did, went through Rinpoche's commentary, then I thought we should read the root text. So I got about halfway through. I can't quite remember exactly what I got to last week, but it doesn't matter. So I'll just recap a little bit anyway. So this text is called Instructions on Turning Happiness and Suffering into the Path to Enlightenment, into the Path of Enlightenment. The author's a Tibetan Lama, Jigme Tempe Nyima. Sure when he lived, actually. Not sure if it says. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So then he gave some preamble, then the way of accepting suffering as the path to enlightenment by means of relative truth. So we were we read that part last time, by means of relative or conventional truth. Reject the state of mind exclusively desiring not to have suffering. Developing, then that's one subheading, divided into two, the uselessness of considering suffering as something unfavorable. So that subheading itself is not something we'd be used to hearing. The uselessness of considering something as unfavorable. I think most of us would have and would and do consider suffering as unfavorable. And, you know, we spend most of our life trying to avoid it, actually. And we never can. So maybe there is something wrong with that attitude. And the only commentary he gives in his text here is what Shantideva said in the Bodhicharyavatara, the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. If you can remedy the suffering, then you don't need to be unhappy. And if you cannot remedy it, there's no benefit in being unhappy. So that's really quite profound, actually. So the uselessness of considering suffering something unfavorable, and the great harm of considering suffering as something unfavorable, uselessness and harm even. So then the next major subheading is developing the attitude of being happy that suffering arises. You know, also something quite foreign to us. Then that had several sections. Suffering as the support of training the mind of emergence from samsara, or suffering as the support of renunciation. So renunciation is the mind that sees all samsaric experiences, whether it's whether it's suffering or what we call happiness, any samsaric experience is something to be abandoned, and to abandon that we need to, since it's the result of a cause, what we really need to abandon is creating the cause of suffering, and set our minds on total liberation from cyclic existence, at least for ourselves. But of course, in the Mahayana, we don't consider that the ultimate goal either. We need to free ourselves from samsara, not for our own happiness and freedom, but for so that we can guide other sentient beings to that freedom. You know, one example that I sometimes think of is like if there's this huge lake with hundreds and thousands of people struggling in the water, sort of drowning, and then, you know, I figure out how to swim. So I kind of swim to the edge and I save myself from drowning. And then I can do one of two things. I can lie back on the bank and think, oh, I'm okay, you know, and there's all the other people who are still drowning and screaming and crying for help, and I'm just kind of relaxing in the sun, just feeling good and happy that I'm out. Or I can, from the vantage point of being out on dry land, I can start reaching in and start pulling people out. So when you think of that part of it, you can see that the fortunate people are the ones closer to the edge that you can grab and pull out. So that's almost like having a perfect human rebirth, you know, having that advantage of being close to the shore. And the people in the middle that are harder to reach, it's kind of more like being in the lower realms. But anyway, I think most of us would agree that the more desirable thing to do is to help, once you get out, is to help others get out, not just kind of relax and enjoy your own freedom and sort of leave the others to their own devices. So renunciation. Then suffering is support for training in taking refuge. So remember that a clear understanding of the suffering of psychic existence, the suffering of suffering, changeable suffering, and pervasive suffering, those three levels of suffering, are the force pushing us towards looking for a solution to suffering. And then if we're fortunate enough to encounter the Dharma, which was taught by the Buddha, and the study and practice of which is supported by our Dharma friends, the Sangha, then those, and we have full confidence in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha to guide us from suffering, then those are the two causes that make us take refuge. So suffering is a support in, so it's useful in that way, in leading us to take refuge. Suffering is supportive training in overcoming pride. So, if we see if we really understand the suffering nature of our life, there's really nothing to be proud of. And pride is one of the 6 principal delusions. Suffering as the support for purification of unvirtuous deeds. So if we understand the evolution of suffering, if we understand karma, that leads us to abandon creating negative karma and leads us to purify the negative karma we've already been creating since beginningless time, and to create good karma. Suffering as support for attraction to virtue. So same thing there, that we understand that positive karma brings happiness. So that's another benefit of understanding the evolution of suffering or the workings of karma. Suffering as support for training in compassion. So if we understand the depth and extent of our beginningless suffering in psychic existence, not just the relatively small sufferings we experience in this life, but the terrible sufferings we've been experiencing in cyclic existence since beginningless time. And we understand that all other samsaric sentient beings are in the same situation, just as we feel compassion for ourselves and whatever suffering we're experiencing and have experienced. That leads us to understand that other sentient beings are undergoing the same experiences, and so we can have compassion for them. And true compassion is wanting others to be free from suffering, and great compassion is wanting more for others to be free from suffering than ourselves. And so that great compassion then leads to bodhicitta. And bodhicitta is the principal cause of enlightenment. So that's what we want. And then taking suffering as the support for the meditation that others are dearer than oneself. So that's the great compassion I'm just mentioning. Did anyone make a note of where we got to?
We got the numbers. We got the number 7.
So what I just said?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So then
taking suffering as support for meditation. Yeah.
Okay, good. So so then there's the conclusion of this section. This section of by means of relative truth. So the author says it's very difficult to practice taking suffering as the path of enlightenment when you actually come face to face with difficult situations. So it's important to become familiar in advance with the trainings of virtue that are to be applied when unfavorable circumstances arise. So also it makes a great difference if you apply a training in which you have clear experience. So, not to diminish Rebecca's experience of being woken by noisy neighbors, we say, well, that's kind of a minor experience, but that's really how we have to start, as I've said, when you're weight training, you start with light weights and you gradually, they get heavier and heavier and heavier as you get stronger and stronger. And so it's like that with, with our meditation practice. You start meditating for short periods and try and perfect, half a minute's meditation without distraction, and then extend that maybe to a minute and 5 minutes, like that, until, we can, meditate for hours or even days at a time, eventually, with unwavering concentration. So I think it'd be impossible to practice transforming great suffering into the path, into happiness, if we haven't practiced with small sufferings. I think I mentioned our friend who's experiencing excruciating pain sort of 24 hours a day following botched pelvic surgery. And, she's just in constant pain all the time. And even though she gets angry when, she has some little experience in Dharma, not a huge amount, but she has a lot of Buddhist friends and she's read books and been to teachings and so forth. But now, if someone tells her about transforming that suffering into the path, into happiness, just makes her angry, because it's just basically impossible for her to do, because she hasn't trained transforming smaller sufferings. So until something like that so before something major like that befalls us, and it can at any time. I mean, one day she was okay, the next day she had surgery, and then the day after that, more than 2.5 years ago, she's been a wreck, So we really need to start with transforming small sufferings. So, well done, Rebecca. Furthermore, it's not enough merely for suffering to become the support of virtuous training itself. You have to realize that the suffering has actually become the support of the path. And then you must feel a strong and stable stream of bliss, which is brought about by that realization. So, we also need to practice generating bliss in our mind. And that can be a little difficult, because sometimes not quite sure what it means. Many years ago, must be in the mid-70s, I think, Lama Yeshe taught us meditation. And I think we did it. I don't know if we did the meditation module on the inner heat or the bliss of inner fire. Lama Yeshe called it the seed syllable meditation. And it's the first of the 6 yogas of Naropa. I think many people have heard of Tumo. Anyone not heard of Tumo? Tumo is the generation of inner heat, and you see these slightly sensational stories of yogis who can, go out in this kind of weather, out on, and sit in 40 or 50 mile an hour wind, which is like, feels like 40 below zero, and take a wet blanket, be naked and take a wet blanket and sit on the snow and ice. And I'm pointing out the window, which you can't see. But, wrap themselves in this wet blanket in these icy sub-zero conditions and meditate and generate inner heat and actually dry off the blanket. So there'd be these competitions to see who can dry off the blanket most quickly. I mean, it's kind of inconceivable that that a person could generate that sort of heat from within their body. But that's, and it's not just for that. It's not sort of like a party trick, but it has a higher purpose. But to generate that kind of control over the winds and channels and the mind, and along with that feeling of inner heat comes a blissful sensation. So when we do that meditation, we visualize the red hot ember at our navel in the central channel, and then we do the exercise of sort of like blowing on a hot coal to visualize this red hot ember getting hotter and hotter, and then the flames coming up through our central channel and burning away the blockages at the main chakras, and then melting the silvery reservoir of blissful energy at our crown chakra. And as that descends down the inside of our central channel, we experience increasing bliss so we visualize this happening, visualize increasing degrees of bliss as it descends on the inside of the central channel. There's an explosion of bliss at our throat chakra, and a greater explosion of bliss at the heart, and incredible explosion of bliss at the navel when this silvery energy melting down our central channel reaches the burning ember. It's like pouring gas on a fire. There's an explosion of energy that permeates all the 72,000 psychic channels in our body. And there's just this incredible experience of bliss throughout our whole body and mind. So that's how we practice the meditation, what we visualize. So our central channel is normally blocked. So none of our the winds or the prana, the energy that our consciousness rides on, the consciousness rides on the wind in these channels. Like a rider rides on a horse, and so normally so when we visualize in that meditation, we visualize the central channel running down through the central axis of our body, and then the right and left channels running down alongside it. They're parallel, and then they join below the navel, like we did that. But actually, in our life, the central channel is blocked because the right and left channels don't run straight. They twist around it, and they occlude the central channel. Because of our delusions. So normally, there's no way that our wind and mind can contact the inside of our central channel. So to open up these channels and to open up the chakras, or these energy centers along the central channel, we practice these meditations. And the closest that our consciousness ever gets to touching the inside of the central channel is during sexual orgasm. So that's the closest that we come to experiencing any kind of blissful sensation. And so why we experience that sort of extremely pleasurable sensation during orgasm, if memory serves correct, is because just there in that lower chakra, the consciousness slightly touches the inside of the central channel at our very bottom chakra. So, we have a crown chakra. Sometimes we talk about a brow chakra, throat, heart, navel, and at the bottom of the central, bottom of our spine in the perineal area, that's the sex chakra. Anyway, so Lama Yeshe taught us that meditation back then in the 70s, and some, little while after that, he suggested that I do some courses in the West. I was living in Nepal at the time, at the Kopan monastery. I was a monk, and he said, because I had a medical degree that lent me some measure of credibility, and that I should do courses for people who are drug dependent, and teach this meditation, so that people might get an experience, or might understand that bliss can be generated, from within the mind, from within the body, without depending on external substances. And if people could realize that, it would make it easier for them to kick the habit, which is what we call the courses, kick the habit. Well, that's what they were mostly called. I did a couple of them in Italy. One year I did, the people organizing the courses called it Drop the Monkey. And the next year I taught it, they called the courses Flee the Cage. So the posters had a cage with a canary in it with the door open. So they're a little more creative with their marketing. So I didn't really have a lot of faith that in 10 days you could cure someone of drug dependence by going to different Dharma centers and doing this 10-day course. And then there was really no follow-up, and most places didn't have other people who knew the meditation that could do subsequent courses. But in England, they did it for a while. And in fact, a couple of people, one person who then became quite prominent in the organization, in the FPMT, our Dharma organization, for a number of years. He actually stopped smoking and drinking, both of which had been problems for him. So, there were one or two small successes like that. But really in my mind, I didn't have anything really special apart from this meditation. I didn't really have anything special to teach. So I just did basic Lam Rim teachings, and my hope was to get people interested enough in the teachings that they would go to Kopan and do a meditation course with Lama Yeshe, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, or if the lamas came to their city where the people were, then they maybe go to those courses and make some connection with the lamas that way. So from that point of view, that was a little more successful. You know, quite a few people got more interested in Dharma. This is back in the 70s. Also, I noticed, and myself as well, that, you know, those in the 70s, you know, most of the people coming to those early courses were people who were already traveling in the East, who'd, a lot of whom had sort of dropped out of their sort of regular lives in America or Europe, Australia, wherever they were. And, you know, they hit the road and they were traveling around Asia. You know, just you know, people had different motivations, what they were looking for. Some looking just to get stoned. Some people were looking for some kind of spiritual trip. You know, there are all kinds of reasons. And most of them were, you know, smoking cigarettes or smoking dope or dropping acid or mostly that. And when they went to a meditation course and they realized, well, you know, they start to understand what the mind is and how it works and what you can do with it. It was kind of, and they found that taking things that makes your mind go up and down like that wasn't really conducive to good meditation. So they stopped using stuff. So that was the experience, that if people got serious enough about meditation, they didn't want to do things that interfered with it. And, you know, getting stoned or drunk or even smoking tobacco interferes with meditation. So they quit. So there was, you know, even without doing the bliss of inner fire. So, so there was that rationale to the whole thing. Anyway, I did it for 2 or 3 years, and then I got busy running a center in India, and I stopped traveling so much for a while. So you know, we need to try to understand how to generate bliss from, you know, within ourselves.
Nick, question on does the inner fire meditation, does that make it a little easier to develop calm abiding? Is that a path that facilitates that, or is just something different?
No, it can be useful for that, and in fact, the end point of the meditation is to use the feeling of like of bliss that you finally arrive at. You know, when the silvery energy hits the burning ember and explodes, and you feel this complete experience of bliss throughout your body and mind, that is then your object of meditation, and you have to hold that and focus on that. And then when you lose that, then there's Lama Yeshe's, then you do an analytical meditation on feeling. You know, is it permanent or impermanent? You know, there are 4, I can't remember, there are 4 things, ways to analyze feeling, Lama Yeshe said. And then, you know, when the concentration wanes, so then you analyze, well, you know, so what is feeling, you know? What's the nature of feeling? Because feeling, you know, there are generally speaking just 3 kinds of feeling: pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. So that's kind of what drives our life in a way. So it's good to try and understand exactly what feeling is. But so then when you've done that analytical meditation, then you go back and do the inner fire, and then you generate the bliss, and then you develop your concentration. So it's just one, another object to focus on to try and develop, calm abiding or single pointed concentration, using the experience of bliss as the focal point.
Nick, in his book, the Bliss of Inner Fire, I think is the name of it. It was also said that if this is what got me kind of worried, if you don't have the initiation, that could be a bad thing, So that had me confused on, well, should we do this or not do this? Should I?
No, you can practice that technique. I mean, where I wasn't giving people initiations. It was
Right.
just anybody, and it's in Sangika, in Kathleen McDonald's book, How to Meditate,
Right.
which is
I didn't know if that, hey, am I doing this wrong by trying this, or?
No, you're not doing it wrong by trying it. I mean, the thing about you're just practicing a meditation technique. You're not doing all the other stuff that goes along with in a complete sadhana, like visualizing yourself as a deity and stuff like that. That we can't do without initiation.
Okay.
So that's fine. I think it looks like Pussycat's experiencing some bliss there.
Oh yeah. He's getting bigger too. Getting a fat cat.
Okay, so as it says, you have to realize that the suffering has actually become the support of the path, and then you must feel a strong and stable stream of bliss, which is brought about by that realization that suffering has become a support for the path. For any of the foregoing categories of training, you should think, just as the suffering I have undergone in the past has greatly helped me achieve happiness in many significant forms, the joy of high realms and liberation from samsara, which are all difficult to obtain, so too the suffering I am now undergoing will also continue to help me to attain the same results. So even if my suffering is severe, it is supremely agreeable. So this is what, if we haven't practiced on small sufferings, then it's very difficult to, I'd say impossible to practice with severe suffering, as in the case of our friend. It's like so I'm not quite sure what this is. It's like a molasses dessert mixed with cardamom and pepper. So I guess the pepper is the suffering part, and the molasses with cardamom is the blissful part. It's probably a Tibetan thing. I don't know. Think about this again and again and cultivate the experience of bliss of the mind. So if we can experience suffering as bliss, then is it still suffering? By training in this way, the overwhelming nature or superabundance of mental bliss makes the sufferings of the sense faculties as if they were imperceptible. Thus, having a mind that cannot be hurt by suffering is the characteristic of those who overcome illness by tolerance. It should be noted that according to this reasoning, this would also be the characteristic of those who overcome other obstacles as well, such as antagonists and evil spirits. As mentioned above, the reversing of the thought of dislike for suffering is the foundation of turning suffering into the path of enlightenment. Because while your mind is disturbed and your courage is extinguished by anxiety, you will not be able to turn your suffering into the path. Also, by training in the actual taking suffering as the path of enlightenment, you will improve the previous training, that is, the reversing of the thought of dislike suffering, because as you actually experience an increase in virtues through suffering, you will grow increasingly courageous or cheerful. It is said, if you gradually train yourself through small sufferings, by easy, gradual stages, as the saying goes, you will ultimately be able to train yourself in great sufferings also. So just reading this, it's hard to keep everything in mind if you're hearing it just for the first time. So Lama Zopa Rinpoche always says when we're reading Dharma books, we shouldn't read them as we do a novel, or just like something just to get to the end, to see what happens. But we should read and think, read and think. So read a sentence and see, what does that mean? Then read another sentence. What does that mean? Or a paragraph, or a couple of sentences, whatever is a chunk that you can keep in mind to think about. So just by running through it here, it's most of it's probably not going to stick, But so that's why if you can get this book, and this is what I'm reading is the root text. There's just a few pages at the back. Most of the book is Lama Zopa Rinpoche's commentary explaining what these pithy sentences mean. So it's something to go through slowly. I mean, you could do a 1-month retreat on this book and really understand the topic much more deeply, and also start to experience the meaning through meditating on it. So according to this instruction, you should train gradually, because it will be difficult for you to gain any experience beyond the scope of your present mental capacity. In the interval between meditation periods, you should pray to the unexcelled three precious jewels, Padambasanga, so that you'll be able to turn suffering into the path. Then, when your mental strength has grown a little, make offerings to the three precious jewels and spirits and implore them, saying, in order that I may gain strength in the practice of virtuous training, please send me unfavorable circumstances. You should maintain the confidence of blissfulness and cheerfulness on all occasions. So in between meditation periods. So, I think for most of us, our whole life is in between meditation periods. If we maybe we only meditate 15, 20 minutes a day or half an hour or something. So that means, 23 and a half hours a day is the in between. So we really need to know, in a way, it's more important to know what to do with our mind when we're not meditating than when we are. But of course, if we don't, so we call that, informal and formal meditation. So formal meditations when we sit on our cushion and, close our eyes and do whatever meditation we're doing, But most of the time we're, we're sleeping, we get up, we eat, we go to work, we talk to people, we, listen to music, we watch TV, so many other things. So that's, if we're not watching our mind and trying to work with it in that time, the little half-hour meditation that we do a day, or 20 minutes, or even 1 hour, it's not going to be that effective. But if we don't do the formal meditation, where we really shut everything out except our mind and work with our mind, then it'll be and become familiar with what our mind is and how it works, then it will be pretty much impossible to do anything with it in between sessions. But so again, and that's why daily meditation practice is important, and why it's also important, I was going to say more important, but maybe equally important, to do retreats from time to time, 10 days, or, life doesn't necessarily offer us the opportunity to do long retreats like 3 years, which some people do. That's like a formal thing, or 3 months, which is more common. If we want to do the Vajrasattva purification retreat, reciting 100,000 Vajrasattva mantras, do some really serious purification, then that takes 3 months. So that was the first retreat pretty much that Lama Yeshe had us do in those early days. The first initiation, highest Yoga Tantra initiation he gave us was the Haruka Vajrasattva, and then sent us off to do 3 months retreat. And then the next year he gave us Manjushri retreat, to do retreat on developing, on the basis of having done the purification, then to do some retreat to try and gain some wisdom. Manjushri, the Buddha of wisdom. So that was a shorter retreat. That was like,
they were like kind of
what? That was about 6 weeks. So, those of us who are living in the East, in those days really did have the luxury of time to go to teachings and to study and to do different kinds of Dharma work and to do longer retreats. So it's a really an amazing gift to have had that time, and if you can make that sort of time, then it's really something to do. And I would say that if you have the chance to take a year or two off and go to India and Nepal and just go to teachings and do retreats and do pilgrimage and do some kind of deep immersion, then that's something that just would really benefit the rest of your life. And, not to mention the benefit you gain from at the time of doing it too. But if you can't get away from your job, if you can't get away from your family and all that, then then we have to try and do the best we can in our present circumstances. When you're first learning this training, it's important to keep mundane diversions at a distance. For amid such diversions, you may become susceptible to the many negative influence of your companions asking you, how can you bear suffering and contempt? The flurry of worries caused by adversaries, relatives, and wealth could defile and disturb your mind beyond control and cause bad habits. There are also various other distracting circumstances that could overpower your mind. So, that's what I'm saying. If you can get away from it all, it's a big advantage. And you don't necessarily have to go to India and Nepal. I mean, you go to Milarepa Center up in Vermont for, if you can, for a couple of weeks or a few months, or some other retreat center in an isolated place where there where you don't see people, and where there are fewer distractions. In solitary places where these distractions are not present, the mind will be very clear, so it'll be easy to concentrate on virtuous trainings. So I talked the other night on Friday. Was it Friday? About Lama Yeshe and those days in Nepal, and I mentioned that in '74 I spent 4.5 months in a cave up in the mountains in the Himalayas, and it was really it was really the best time of my life. Didn't see anybody, didn't speak to anybody. I had Vajrasattva meditation to do, and I wanted to stay there for years, but unfortunately I had an obligation, so I had to come down, and so I'd never be able to recreate that situation. But that cave is still there, up in Laudo, where Lama Zopa Rinpoche comes from, and it is still possible to go up there and do retreat in that area. In fact, Laudo, the place where Lama Zopa Rinpoche lived in his last life, and there's a quite well-developed retreat center there now. His sister runs it, and it was run by his mother and his sister till his mother passed away quite a few years ago now. But Wendy went up there in '98. Wendy did 3-month retreat up there in '98. Venerable Amy Miller was up there too at the same time, and so they welcome people to go up there. So maybe when we're able to travel again, you might think about going up to Laudo and doing a 3 or even 3 months or even longer retreat. If you do, you'll thank me for pushing you into it. One of the things about where to retreat, I don't remember them all, but there are like 6 qualities of a place that's conducive to retreat. I think if you read the teachings on developing calm abiding, it'll mention there. But isolated places away from people, places where holy beings have meditated. So there's something in the air and so up there there's caves. Not nearby there's a cave that Milarepa meditated in. And the Himalayas have been full of yogis meditating for centuries. And where there are wildflowers, I was there in the summer, so every couple of weeks, when you go out, you just see the mountainside covered with beautiful flowers, and every couple of weeks there'd be different kinds of flowers. So it was really amazing just to see them and to be among them, and then pick some and make offering of these flowers on the altar, where the water is pure and clean. So I had to, there was a stream nearby, so I had to go and collect water every few days. I had a big, it was kind of a biscuit tin that you could get in Nepal then. I don't know how, it was 4 gallons, or anyways, it was heavy when it was full of water, and I had to fit it in my backpack. And as the summer went on, the stream started to dry up, so you had to go further and further up the mountain. Luckily, you're going up the mountain with an empty tin and coming down the mountain with a full one. So that was all right. But And one of the other things is, if you're trying to do that, where to be surrounded, for the people that are around to be supportive of what you're doing. So the cave where I was, it was quite isolated. So there, occasionally you'd hear a yak herder go by with some yaks, and I had a nun from a nearby nunnery do my shopping every couple of weeks. So I'd leave a list for her at the gate. So the cave, there's a little wall with a little gate there. So I'd leave a list outside the gate, and she went to the market. It was 2 or 3 hours away, and bring back stuff for me like that. So I had that support. And then, I had teachings on on Vajrasattva meditation from Lama Yeshis, and I had the blessings of Lama Yeshi and Lama Zopa. So all the conditions really came together. So that's kind of an ideal situation, and it's still there. This was 47 years ago, so those conditions are still basically there. So you can do it. Solitary places. For this reason, even Chöd practitioners, Chöd, slaying the ego. So Chöd is a practice where you, well, it's quite a complicated practice, but part of it is you visualize chopping up your body and giving it to spirits. And the serious practitioners used to do the practice in charnel grounds. So we don't have charnel grounds anymore. We have cemeteries, which are all very neat and clean, and it looks more like a park than a place full of dead bodies. But the charnel grounds is, they just toss the bodies there and let the wild animals eat them, and there were bones and rotting corpses and stuff everywhere. And it said that those places really attract negative spirits. So you would go there and then challenge the spirits to come and attack you, and then your ego freaks out. So then you see very clearly. Yeah. So you do this practice to provoke your strong feeling of self. And then when that strong feeling of self arises, when you're in a fearful place and you don't quite, and you're scared for your life and stuff, it's your ego, your I, your self-existent I is really strong. It's easy to see and easy to meditate on, and to come to the understanding it doesn't really exist as it appears. It's a delusion. So that's why the practice is Chöd practice. Is called like slaying the ego. Even Chöd practitioners, when meditating on stepping on or controlling suffering, at first avoid practicing near the harmful actions of men or amid worldly diversions. Instead, they train mainly with the apparitions of gods, positive spirits, and demons, negative spirits, in solitary cemeteries and power spots. In brief, you should prevent attitudes of dislike toward internal illness, external antagonists, evil spirits, and unharmonious speech from arising, not only in order to make your mind impervious to misfortune and suffering, but also to bring bliss to your mind from the vicissitudes themselves. You should accustom yourself to generating only the feeling of liking them. To do this, you should cease to view harmful circumstances as negative, and should make every effort to train yourself to view them as valuable, because whether things are pleasing or not depends on how your mind perceives them. Whether things are pleasing or not depends on how your mind perceives them. For example, if a person is continuously aware of the faults in worldly pursuits, then if his retinue and wealth increase, he'll feel all the more revulsion towards them. On the other hand, if a person perceives worldly pursuits as beneficial, he will even aspire to increase his majestic power. So if you're aware of the faults of worldly pursuits, then even, if you have more people and money and everything, you'll just feel even more revolted by that stuff. By practicing this kind of training, so that's kind of the essence of renunciation. By practicing this kind of training, your mind will become gentle, your attitude will become broad, you'll become easy to be with, you'll have a courageous mind, your spiritual training will become free from obstacles. All bad circumstances will arise as glorious and auspicious. Your mind will always be satisfied by joy of peace. To practice the path of enlightenment in this quarreling age, you must never be without the armor of this kind of training. When you are not affected by the suffering of anxiety, not only will other sufferings disappear, like weapons dropping from the hands of soldiers, but in most cases, even the real negative forces, such as illnesses themselves, will automatically disappear. The holy ones of the past said, by not feeling any dislike toward or discontent about anything, your mind will remain undisturbed. When your mind is not disturbed, your energy will not be disturbed, and thereby other elements of the body will also not be disturbed. Because of this, your mind will not be disturbed, and so the wheel of joy will keep revolving. They also said, the holy ones of the past, as birds find it easy to injure horses and donkeys with sores on their backs, evil spirits or negative forces will easily find the opportunity to harm those whose nature is fearful. But it will be difficult to harm those whose nature is stable or strong. Learned people realize that all happiness and suffering depend upon the mind, and therefore seek happiness from the mind itself. They understand that because the causes of happiness are complete within us, they are not dependent on external sources. So, this was the point of Lama Yeshe sending me to do these courses. With this realization, no matter what the afflictions, whether from beings or physical matter, they will not be able to hurt us. The same strength of mind shall also be with us at the time of death. We will always be free from the control of external afflictions. The meditative absorption of bodhisattvas, known as overpowering of all elements by happiness, is also accompanied by this means. Instead of seeking happiness within their minds, foolish people chase after external objects, hoping thereby to find happiness. But the pursuit of any worldly happiness, whether great or small, presents those people seeking it with many failures, such as their not being able to attain it, to associate with it, or to keep it in balance. For such foolish people, as a proverb says, control is in the hands of others, as if their hair were tangled in a tree. I guess that means if your hair is tangled in a tree, you can't get away if people are attacking you. So I think that's probably what it means. Enemies and robbers will find it easy to harm these foolish people. Even a little criticism will drive happiness away from their minds. Their happiness will never be reliable, but will be as when a crow nurses a baby cuckoo. However much the crow nurtures the baby, it will be impossible for the baby cuckoo to become a baby crow. When such is the case, there will be nothing that is not tiresome for the gods, positive forces, miserable for demons, negative forces, and suffering for them, foolish people. This heart advice is the condensation of 100 different crucial points in one. There are many other instructions, such as how to accept the hardship of asceticism for practicing the path, and how to turn illness and harmful effects into the path, as taught in the Shiche teachings. Shiche means creating peace, and so on. But here I've just written in an easily understandable outline on accepting suffering as the support based on the teachings of Shantideva and his learned followers. So Shiche teachings, I'm not really familiar with, but it was a kind of teaching was taught by, there was a great Indian teacher, I think it's from southern India, called Padambasanga, and but he traveled to Tibet, and he traveled even as far as China, spreading the Dharma. And he was, some people said he was an incarnation of Kamala Shila. So remember Kamala Shila? He when King Trisong Detsen invited Sangharakshita from India, the great abbot, to establish monastic Buddhism in Tibet, and the great yogi Padmasambhava to Tibet to dispel hindrances to the spread of Dharma in Tibet around the year 750. They established Samye Monastery in southern Tibet, and the Indian teacher Kamala Shila, I think he was maybe, I don't know if he lived there for a while or he used to come and visit and give teachings, but there was a Chinese pilgrim called Hashang Mahayana showed up there, and he was propounding this school of instant enlightenment. I guess I really don't know much about it, but it's like Chan or Zen, Buddhist meditation. I don't even know how you do it, but he was a strong proponent of that kind of meditation, and not sort of the sort of instant enlightenment, not the gradual path to enlightenment, as later taught in the Lam Rim by Atisha. So he was saying that the kind of Buddhism that should be taught and practiced in Tibet was more like Zen than Indian Buddhism. So there was this dispute, and so the king said, okay, well, we're going to have this, I think the king, we're going to have this debate between Kamala Shila, the great Indian teacher, and this Chinese monk, and whoever wins the Tibet, whoever wins the debate. Did I say debate? Or did I say Tibet? Whoever wins the debate, that will determine the kind of Buddhism practiced in Tibet. So yada, 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 Kamala Shila won, and so Indian Buddhism prevailed. And, as His Holiness says, that Tibetan Buddhism is really the Nalanda tradition of Buddhism from the great Indian monastery of Nalanda. So Padambasanga, who lived around the 10th or 11th century, something like that, he was said to be an incarnation of Kamala Shila. There's this famous text, 100 Verses of Advice. subheading, Tibetan Buddhist teachings on what matters most. So this is Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, great Nyingma Lama. His teachings on Padambasanga's advice, I think it was advice to the people of Tingri. Tingri is a village in southern Tibet, and Padambasanga gave this, here it says 100, I thought it was 108 verses, but 100 verses of advice. This would be a really great little book to go through and talk about at some point. One of the first, we had a little pamphlet when just after I first arrived. It was just sort of cyclo-styled, just on 2, 3 or 4 pages, called Padambasanga's Advice to the People of Tingri. And it just had these little aphorisms there. It was one of the first translation of Tibetan teachings that I saw. It was just kicking around. People were handing around this piece of paper, copies of this piece of paper. So anyway, that's Padambasanga, and he was teaching these Shiche teachings. So I'm not quite sure exactly what that school of that genre of teaching is. Okay, so that was the the way of accepting suffering as a path to enlightenment by means of relative truth. By means of absolute truth, this is how to draw your mind to dwell contemplatively in supreme peace, the natural state of emptiness, in which unfavorable circumstances or even their names cannot be found, and how it is realized by means of reasoning knowledge, such as the refutation of the arising of phenomena from any of the 4 extremes. It is, it isn't, both, or neither. Even when you're out of that contemplative state, you should overcome unfavorable circumstances by seeing them as being hollow, mere names, and not arising in the manner that feelings of suffering arose in your mind when fear and intimidation occurred in the past. So there's, in 37 practices of the Bodhisattva, so this famous teaching by Togme Sangpo, I'm actually giving a series of talks on this for the Florida Center on Sunday mornings, competing with Geshe-la. I just started yesterday. So there are just a couple of verses on emptiness. Whatever appears in your own mind, your mind from the start was free. So this is his bit on emptiness. Whatever appears in your own mind, your mind from the start was free from fabricated extremes. Understanding this, do not take to mind inherent signs of subject and object. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. When you encounter attractive objects, though they seem beautiful, like a rainbow in summer, don't regard them as real and give up attachment. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. All forms of suffering are like a child's death in a dream. Holding illusory appearances to be true makes you weary. Therefore, when you meet with disagreeable circumstances, see them as illusory. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. so it kind of reflects when we do the Guru Puja. Remember in the Lamrim part at the end, it talks about space-like voidness and illusion-like voidness. So it's two ways to perceive emptiness: as empty space, nothing exists from its own side, or illusion-like void. Although things appear, they don't really exist as the way they appear. They're illusions. They're illusions because the way we see them is not the way in which they exist. So that's a means of dealing with suffering. Seeing so it's illusory, or just meditating on the emptiness, on the space-like emptiness of it. So then the second part is the way of taking happiness as the path to enlightenment. So before was suffering, now is the way of taking happiness as the path to enlightenment, by means of relative truth and by means of absolute truth again. Relative truth: if you slip under the control of happy circumstances or things that cause happiness, you will become proud, arrogant, and complacent. And this will obstruct your path toward enlightenment. But it's difficult not to fall under the sway of happiness. For as Padampa says, Padambasanga, people can bear great suffering, but only a little happiness. Therefore, consider how all the various phenomena of happiness and their sources are impermanent and full of suffering. Make efforts to develop a strong revulsion towards them and to turn your mind away from careless behavior. Again, you ought to think, all the wealth and happiness of the world are insignificant and linked with much harm. Nevertheless, some of it has value. As the Buddha says, for a person whose freedom is impaired by suffering, it is very difficult to achieve enlightenment. But it will be easy for a person to achieve enlightenment if he is in comfort. So all the wealth and happiness of the world are insignificant because the pleasure they bring is minuscule compared to the infinite blissful happiness of liberation and enlightenment. And linked with much harm because we get attached to temporal pleasure, and by getting attached to it, that attachment obscures the shortcomings of pleasure, and also we create negative karma, the cause of suffering, by being attached to happiness. So it's counterproductive. So, as the great teachers always say, sentient beings hate suffering, but run as fast as they can to create its cause. And they love happiness, but they run as fast as they can to destroy it. Something like that. So insignificant and linked with much harm. But some of it has value because, if we're inexperienced practitioners and we're undergoing great hardship and suffering, if, we don't have any sort of, we're totally preoccupied with finding, food, clothing, shelter, temporal needs, just things to sustain our physical existence. We don't have the leisure, the time to, don't have the freedom to practice Dharma. So that's why, the first attributes of the perfect human rebirth are the 8 freedoms, sometimes translated as the 8 leisures. So if we're not born in the hells, we're not born as a hungry ghost, we're not born animal, we're not born in the God realms, we're born at a time when the Buddha's teachings exist, if we're born in a place where those teachings are, if we're not physically or mentally impaired in some way, if we don't have fixed wrong views, then we have the leisure to study and practice Dharma. So, that's, but then if we get attached to that leisure and don't take this opportunity that we have, this very short opportunity we have, this very rare opportunity that we have to study and practice Dharma, then we've completely blown it. But it will be easy for a person to achieve enlightenment if the person is in comfort. As long as we see that this freedom from having to be obsessed with pursuing the means of living as long as if we're not obsessed with pursuing the means of living, and the leisure that gives us if we spend that time in practicing Dharma, not just continuing to seek sort of samsaric pleasure. I don't know if that was a complete sentence or not. It is my great good fortune to have the opportunity to practice Dharma in happiness. So, generally speaking, compared to most people in the world, I think we're very fortunate, we're very happy. So we should make the most of this opportunity, understand how we got here. A lot of hard work practicing Dharma in our previous lives, and a lot of strong prayers that we've been in this situation before and we took advantage of it, and we prayed very strongly to have this chance again. And so we created the cause, and those prayers helped link the cause to the result. We can pray till we're blue in the face to experience this or that. If we haven't created the cause, there's no way we'll get that experience. So now that we're having this experience of perfect human rebirth, we know that's the result of having had many perfect human rebirths in the past, and having made strong prayers that we have the opportunity again. So having brought ourselves here, as Shantideva says, there's nothing more foolish than squandering this opportunity. Nothing more foolish. This is what we wanted. This is what we worked really hard. We practiced in previous life much harder than we're practicing in this life. So it's still a question whether in future lives we'll have this opportunity that we have right now again. So we really have to try and make every post a winner. Now I must buy Dharma with this happiness. I must buy Dharma with this happiness. And from the Dharma will happiness arise continuously. So I should train in making Dharma and happiness each other's support. So that's what it says in the teachings. The Bodhisattva practicing the path goes from happiness to happiness. Otherwise, like boiling water in a wooden pot, the final outcome will be the very same as it was at the beginning. I'm not sure what that means. Any ideas? Like boiling water in a wooden pot, the final outcome will be the very same as it was at the beginning.
Does that mean that the pot burns up, the water puts out the fire, and eventually the water's cold?
Yeah, maybe. Okay, well, that's something to meditate on. Thus, you should achieve the essential goal of life by uniting whatever happiness and joy arises with the Dharma. This is the view of Nagarjuna's precious garland. If you're happy but do not recognize it, your happiness will not become the instrument of Dharma training, and you'll be wasting your life with the hope of a separate happiness. Therefore, as the antidote to the hopes for having a separate happiness, you should apply appropriate methods among the trainings given above and should possess the ambrosia of contentment. There are other ways to take happiness as the path, such as those based on the instructions on training in bodhicitta and on remembering the kindness of the three precious jewels. For the time being, however, this much is sufficient. Further, in order to accept happiness as the path, as explained in the case of suffering, you should alternate the trainings of purification with the accumulation of merit in a solitary place. So the way of taking happiness as path to enlightenment by means of absolute truth, you should understand it by the training given earlier, that is the training on suffering. So, illusory or space-like. Conclusion. If you cannot practice Dharma because of sorrow when you are suffering, and if you cannot practice Dharma because of your attachment to happiness when you're happy, then it will be impossible for you to have a chance to practice Dharma. So if you practice Dharma, there is nothing more essential than this training of transforming, suffering and happiness into the path. If you have this training, whatever kind of place you stay in, whether it's a solitary place or a city, whatever the friends you associate with, whether good or bad, in whatever situation you find yourself, whether in riches or poverty, happiness or sorrow, whatever conversations you hear, whether praise or condemnation, good or bad, you will never be afraid that it might diminish you. Thus, this training is called the lion-like training. So, strong like a lion. Then whatever you do, your mind will be at ease and relaxed. Your attitude will be pure. Your final accomplishment will be excellent. Even though physically you're living in this impure land, your mind will be enjoying the glory of inconceivable bliss or peace, like the bodhisattvas of the Pure Lands. As the Kadampa Lamas say, by means of such training, happiness will be brought under control, suffering will be ended. If you are alone, it will be the companion of sadness. If you are sick, it will nurse you. Goldsmiths purify gold by melting it and making it flexible by rinsing it in water again and again. It is likewise with the mind. If by taking happiness as the path, you develop ardent desire for the practice of the Dharma, and if by taking suffering as the path, you cleanse your mind, then you shall easily attain the extraordinary meditative absorption that makes your mind and body capable of accomplishing what you wish. If by taking happiness as the path, you develop the ardent desire for the practice of Dharma, and if by taking suffering as the path, you cleanse your mind, then you shall easily attain the extraordinary meditative absorption that makes your mind and body capable of accomplishing what you wish. I can see that this training is the most profound method for perfecting moral discipline. the root of virtues. Because it generates non-attachment to happiness, the foundation of the extraordinary moral discipline of renunciation is established. Because it generates freedom from the fear of suffering, it makes the discipline pure. As it is said, giving is the basis of moral discipline. Patience is the cleanser of moral discipline. So, the karmic result of giving is to have resources in the future. So if we have resources and we don't have to obsess over them, like I was just saying, then that gives us the freedom to practice Dharma. Food, clothing, shelter, things come to us more easily as a karmic result of generosity, the first perfection. Second perfection, on top of that, is morality, the practice, the 6 bodhisattva perfections. The third perfection is patience. So patience is the cleanser of moral discipline. So through patience, we overcome anger, which is the worst of the negativities. It destroys our merit and creates the worst kind of karma to be born in the lowest of the lower realms. By training this way now, when you reach the higher stages of the path, your attainments will come about, as it is said. Bodhisattvas realize that all phenomena are like Maya, illusory. And they see that their births in samsara are like entering a joyful garden. Therefore, either at the time of prosperity or decline, they will not experience the danger of either emotional defilements or suffering. Here are some illustrations from the life of the Buddha. Before attaining enlightenment, he renounced the universal rulership as if it were straw and sat by the Naranjana river with no concern for the harshness of the austerities he was practicing. So, he was born to a powerful king who wanted him to take over the kingdom, but he renounced that and left to seek the truth of nature of existence. And the Naranjana river is the river that he sat near in Bodh Gaya under the Bodhi tree, where he attained enlightenment. This indicates that the development of equal taste of happiness and suffering was necessary for him to achieve the ambrosia, that is, full enlightenment. So the samsaric happiness of the kingdom and the suffering of the austerities he practiced were necessary for him to achieve enlightenment. After the Buddha attained enlightenment, on the one hand, the chiefs of human beings and gods up to the highest realms placed his feet on the crowns of their heads and offered him respect and service for all his needs and comfort. On the other hand, the Brahmin Bharadvaja abused him with 100 allegations. A Brahmin's daughter slandered him with accusations of sexual misconduct, and he lived on rotten horse fodder for 3 months in the country of King Agnidatta and so forth. So I'm not familiar with those stories, actually. So I'm not sure if they come from the Jataka tales, from stories of his previous life, or these are things that happened after his enlightenment. I can't imagine him living on horse fodder after he was enlightened. Rotten horse fodder, at that. Yet throughout all these, the Buddha remained without any alternations of mind, excitement, or depression, just like Mount Sumeru, which cannot be moved by the wind, this powerful, huge mountain. This indicates that it is necessary to develop equal taste of happiness and suffering in order to act for the benefit of living beings. the colophon. It is appropriate for this teaching to be taught by those who are like the Lord Kadampas, who have a history of not crying when there is suffering and of having great revulsion towards samsara when there is happiness. If a man like me teaches it, I'm afraid that my own tongue will have contempt for me. But with my goal of achieving the habit of equal taste of the 8 worldly affairs, 8 worldly dharmas, I, the poor old man Tempe Nima, have written this in the forest of many birds. So, it's difficult to absorb all the meanings, many of the meanings, just by reading through it like this, but through going through it and being introduced sort of when I say that Rinpoche says when you read a Dharma book, you have to do it very slowly and bit by bit, read and think, read and think, read and think. Personally, I think it's useful to breeze through the whole thing, just read through the whole thing once, just to get an idea of what it contains, then go back, read and think, read and think, read and think. At least that way you kind of have an idea of where you're going, where it's taking you. I can't remember if Rinpoche said that or not, but so anyway, this is not a big book, but it's just, an amazing training. So, if you feel inclined, get the book, read and think. Any questions? That was the end. Okay, well, as Lama Yeshe used to say, if there are no questions, I won't keep you your time. So that's it, 5 weeks, transforming problems. I hope I haven't created any more, but if I have, transform them. And next week's off, and then I think in a couple of weeks we start establishing a daily practice. Another 5 weeks on that. So, if you'd like to come to that, very happy. And until then, dedicate the merit and see you later. So just think, because of this merit, we created generating bodhicitta at the beginning and reading these teachings of Tempe Nima on transforming problems. No question, we've created a lot of merit, which is very precious. Merit is the actual cause of all happiness and success. So we really want to make sure we don't destroy it, having created it with a lot of effort, so dedicated. So think, because of this merit, may I quickly become a Buddha in order to lead all sentient beings to enlightenment. Okay, guys, thank you very much for the opportunity to harangue you like this. And hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nick.